Have you guys ever had anything repoed?
Yes. Yeah, I had a car repossessed.
Were you present when he repossessed it?
No, and I don't know. I guess I don't know how they found it. Like, cause like it was like I had moved in the meantime. Like I was at a different address that they didn't know about, and like it was like parked around the corner anyway. And like I was like well over 6 months behind in payments at the time. And yeah, they found it like one night while I was asleep. I don't know. I guess I don't know how they found it. I guess maybe I don't know. Do police scanners like license plate scanners like report that kind of stuff to repo agencies? I have no idea how they found it.
So it's not just that there's it's police scanners, but I've actually seen this where private eyes essentially are subcontracted out to do this, or they will be paid by the financial institution that has lent out the money to go around. Basically, you can see them on some police interceptors where they've got cameras on the front and back. They look like these little boxes which have like infrared on it, but you can be kind of like a private eye. And I've seen this. It was at like, I was walking to the train. I was in New York City. It was at like 6:45 in the morning, and I saw it. And so basically they just cruise the streets and it syncs up to a database. And whenever they get a hit of this is a license plate of a car that is, delinquent 90 days or whatever it is, then yeah, they can tag it for being repoed. So they go find it. That's how it fucking works.
Yeah. No, I literally never even followed up on it. I just I was like, wow, I don't think it could have got stolen. So I like called the police. I don't remember who I called. I called somebody to make sure that it hadn't been towed or something. And then I don't remember what happened. But no, I ended up I got evicted from my apartment like a week later because clearly I had major financial issues, you know what I'm saying? And so then I just literally just never even followed up on the car. I'm like, well, I owe thousands and thousands of dollars on this. I'm never getting it back anyway, so fuck it. But no, this is funny because Dwight, you might remember this. I keep getting letters. Capital One has found me again, right? And I'm getting first of all, I'm getting bombarded with phone calls for this, I'm sure, that I don't answer, and for many other credit card debts, that sort of stuff. But I keep getting letters in the mail from Capital One saying you're pre-approved for a car loan, and I did a post on Twitter about that because it's so absurd to me because it's
fucking insane.
I already owe you $12,000. I'm not pre-approved for a car loan. What the fuck are you talking about? And I did a post about that, and what was so funny is that 3 days later the Capital One Twitter account replied to me and was like, hey, we can make those letters stop. Send us your address and your email address or something like that. And I was like, no, nice fucking try.
Nice try.
Nice try. No fucking way, dude. You're not getting me like that.
This is a reason, and I'm fucking convinced of this, that why many polls tend to skew conservative is because, let's say, the older generations who are much more financially secure than we are, and the younger generations,
they're able to use their phones like normal people.
They answer the phone.
Yeah,
if they see a number they don't know, they fucking answer it.
I literally when we're recording this podcast, I record on my cell phone, as you guys know, and I have to have my phone on airplane mode so I don't get any phone calls. In the space of an hour, I guarantee I would get at least one. I can't even use my phone. It's just it ruins my ability to use my phone like a normal person.
But that's why when a lot of these polls that call you, why would you fucking answer a call, especially if you have debt, especially if you have outstanding debt, and this is the thing that fucking drives me up the wall, is those that are the older generations that are financially secure, or anybody that does not have debt has no fucking idea the stress and dread and anxiety and metastasizing depression that it calls to have people constantly hounding you, this unfeeling phalanx of unwanted communication that is constantly on your back. It is a horrific feeling.
Well, it's funny because I only just moved to New York a couple years ago, right? And so prior to living here, I lived in Virginia, and so how they'll spoof their number or whatever. They'll use a local area code based on where they think you live to call you in order to make it more likely that you'll pick it up. So I used to get all the random calls, and I still get them from 804 area codes, but now within the past last few months, I guess they figured out that I live here, and now I'm getting them from local area codes. And like due to my new job that I just got, like I have to be on call. So like they, you know, my work calls my cell phone, and they're calling it from these different numbers. So like last week, I finally picked up one of the debt collectors like accidentally, and it was like I don't even remember what it was. It was like some credit card or like some store card. It was something. Oh no, it was a gym membership that I let lapse like 6 years ago or something, and I owe like $200 something, and I was like, all right, let's settle this right now, and I was like, I'll give you $20. And he's like, you want to make a payment of $20? It's like, no, I just want to give you $20, and then that's it. Then we're going to be settled, right? Do you want? I mean, this has been 6 years. Do you want something or not? You know? And he's like, okay, well, I need you to speak with my supervisor. You know, you're going to make a payment of $20. Now, before I transfer you, do we have permission to contact you at this number in the future? I was like, well, you're already doing that without my permission. Like, what do you mean? And then like I just started like getting irritated with it. He's like, well, do we have your permission, you know, to contact you at this number in the future? He says, what's your current address? I was like, oh, okay, dude, never mind. And I just hung up.
Good
and
for you.
So hopefully, I don't know, I'll catch up with him in another 3 or 4 years, I guess.
I used to get a lot of calls like that for like outstanding student loan debt.
Yeah.
Because there was a certain point where it just got to a point where like I couldn't pay it, and I tried to like do the negotiation thing, and they kept trying to get some kind of payment. I was just like, all right, well, fuck this. I'm just not gonna pay it. Like,
Good.
That's it. I don't have the money. I'm not gonna pay it.
That was my position. Yeah, I was like, let's settle it right now, man. Let's settle it right now. $20. Take it or leave it.
Anyway, they kept calling me. There was this extended period where I was unemployed, and they kept calling me. And at a certain point, I decided I was just gonna pick up the phone and like talk to the person, and try to reason with them, as you were saying, Chris. Like, just say like, hey, I don't have the money. I can give you whatever this, and you can just leave me alone. And of course they wouldn't acquiesce to that. So then I just started picking up the phone and lecturing them about the Ottoman Empire. Just see like how much time I could waste, because I'd be like, well, I already did my job search thing for 4 hours today. I've got the afternoon free. Let's talk about the Balkans, baby. Let's go.
Well, I'll tell you what else I do sometimes when I get like telemarketing calls, or when I get calls from numbers I don't recognize. Sometimes I will pick it up because I used to sell solar panels over the phone. Yes. And there's like a lot of like telemarketing, telephone soliciting companies that sell solar panels, and I tend to get a lot of them. So like if I get a call from a number I don't recognize, I'll answer it and I'll be like, solar panels, tell me you got solar panels, please, solar panels, and they'll be like, hello, is this Christopher Smith? I'll be like, solar panels, please. I'm trying to build a whole goddamn solar farm. I'm trying to go off the grid. I'm trying to make my whole fucking life green. Solar panels, please. And I'll just keep talking about solar panels until, eventually they hang up on me.
You should try it next time they call you. Try to sell them stuff.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is that the last call that I did that with, what it ended up being, it was one of those scam calls where they were trying to solicit donations for the police or something. You know what I'm saying? And the guy, I don't know if he was new or something, but he was really bad at it. And I kept throwing him off his game. And I could say something about solar panels, and then he'd start his pitch, and then I'd interrupt him, right? And then when I'd stop, there'd be a couple seconds of silence, and then he'd start his pitch over again. He had no idea how to handle it.
Sir, did you know that sanitation workers are 3 times more likely to be killed and injured on the job than law enforcement officers?
Right.
Not if they have solar panels, buddy. That's why you got to get in on the ground floor, Buy them now. I have one thing I was thinking that was sort of related, not to the call thing, but what you were talking about before, Dwight. The private eye thing to scope out people's vehicles and things.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember a couple of years ago, there was this app that was launched, and its first name was Vigilante?
Yes.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And they rolled it out with this promotional video, and the whole concept of the app was vis-a-vis the peer-to-peer, share economy apps like Rideshare or Airbnb or all those other precarious work apps, right? They had this one where it was why can't we crowdsource law enforcement? And the idea was and it showed this in the promo. It was a dark, gritty city night, and this guy starts following a woman, right? And the woman's scared, so she starts she huddles in her coat, and she starts walking a little faster, and the guy's wearing a dark hoodie, and he's walking even faster after her. And then people start noticing this happening, and they all start going on their phones, And then the next part of it was like there's like guys on bikes who like have this app on their phone who now start like following the like potential like victim and the potential criminal in this situation.
Jesus
and the
Christ.
idea was you would get a notification on your phone if you had the app loaded that was like, potential crime in progress, like go rush over there to be another one of the people, and then at the end it shows everybody like filming the crime and stuff, like and so of course they got this like huge backlash off of it because everybody who watched this was like, this is fucking insane. I mean, this is so much of a weird surveillance security state like culture now that like, because the idea wasn't to like replace the police, the idea was to do this in tandem with the police, so like everybody should work together with the police to help catch these awful criminals. And then they removed a few of the elements of it, in particular the element that encouraged you to follow an active crime in progress, because again the name of the fucking app was Vigilante, and so eventually they changed the name of it to Citizen.
Exactly.
They did roll it out. They removed that particular aspect of the app, and they re-released their video, and they kind of cut the more problematic element of it out. But as far as I know, it was still attempted in one city or another. Yeah, I was just thinking about that in terms of like, again, those like repo guys. Could you imagine like the awful human beings who would sign up to a service like that now and join these like kind of fucking Batman LARPy night squads where they just like run out and start, like harassing people and saying like, I put you on the app, and like showing the Vigilante
It's a bunch of three percenters and Proud Boys and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, it looks like, in Inception where like all the NPCs in your dream realize that you're like in the dream and they start looking at you and following you.
Yeah. I'd do it. I'd do the app. But only because I would be good as Batman. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
Or the Joker. I'd be good as either of those. I know I'd be very good at being either of them.
Well, the Joker would use the app because he would know that Batman is using the app, and then that would be the way the Joker would track down Batman to the scene of various crimes to like cause all sorts of mayhem.
Oh my god, this new shitty Batman movie that's coming out. That's what they should go like an app route. Because they have Paul Dano as the Riddler. He should like trick Batman with an app. I mean, it's already gonna be garbage. Like,
that was the fucking point of like the Batman Forever, where it was Jim Carrey and he was just sucking up all the information from the brains of the people that were at home and crowdsourcing it and just sitting there twitching and fucking loving all the information that was going into his noggin.
Oh my god, you're right.
Now we can do that, except it's 12 times more of a creepier Paul Dano.
Yeah.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
I'm the Joker, baby.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and we have with us, as always, Shane.
Why so serious?
As well as Chris.
Howdy, folks. This is Chris. So let's see here. No, I don't know. We're all, we wanted to do an episode this week. Obviously, we're all, as I'm sure you guys are, big fans of the television program, The Righteous Gemstones. And I think we originally intended to release this episode about a week ago and capitalize on the series or the season finale. Unfortunately, we got delayed due to various circumstances. So here we are.
Capitalism.
Yep.
I found God, so that was it.
Well, good for you, man.
Yeah.
Hey, congrats, Shane.
So very briefly, I don't know, I don't really have much to say about this, but I don't know if you guys, I think I might have dropped it in the group DM, but did you guys see the that Politico article a couple weeks ago? Render to God and Trump. Ralph Reed calls for 2020 obedience to Trump.
Can I just interrupt really quick? Because this pisses me off so much, just immediately the title of this book.
Right, yeah.
It's obviously a play on...
Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, yeah.
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God. Right. And And the point of that statement in all accepted like theological readings is that recognize that Caesar is a tyrant, but don't take arms up against him because your true covenant is with God. So the idea is not like, well, both Caesar and God are good, right? The idea is that like you have to accept the awful situation you're in, and instead of taking up arms and trying to like create a political insurrection for like a free Judea, right? Like accept that you're part of this like horrible godless empire and take your kind of moral personal activities elsewhere.
Right.
So like saying render unto Trump in that case would be the recognition that it's like an illegitimate government, which is clearly not what he's even fucking saying, which shows that he didn't even read the fucking Bible.
Well, really though, a lot of these guys they do recognize that in a certain sense. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of these guys they won't try to pretend that Trump is some sort of great moral figure. Like they recognize him as flawed and like having his downsides in some sort of sense, but they still see him as, you know, ordained by God in some sort of way, because they see him as, you know, the person who's, you know, going to defend Israel and who's going to defend Christianity and all this sort of bullshit. By the way, the reason I wanted to mention that is because Ralph Reed, as you know, many of our listeners may remember, Ralph Reed was a close business partner, business associate with Jack Abramoff back during the Bush era, you know, major corruption, financial crimes, scandals. Yes. So yeah, Ralph Reed thoroughly, should have been prosecuted, thoroughly disgraced, you know, by his association and all his various crimes and corruption with Jack Abramoff. But like that's not even mentioned in this article. Like we have to like continue to see these fucking assholes be brought up, and like we have to pretend like we should take them seriously. And like this is his past and his crimes and all this is not even mentioned in the article. You know, he's treated as this serious figure. So I guess I wanted to kind of set the tone for this episode with this. And you know what I was reminded of when we were just talking, I guess a little bit in the intro, and what we were talking about before I guess we even started recording. A little personal anecdote. I had this sales job this one time, like a couple jobs ago. It was this like particularly awful telephone sales job, right? And it was the kind of thing that, you know, if you wanted to be good at it and you wanted to make a lot of money, you had to be particularly vicious. Ultimately, this is why I ended up quitting. You know, I didn't have it in me to really go to the lengths necessary that you needed to excel at it, and it was just so fundamentally opposite of my beliefs and my ethics that you know, basically I had like, you know, a breakdown, and I quit because I couldn't do it anymore. You know, and this is an interesting kind of thing that we were talking about before we started recording. This, you know, like under capitalism, you know, ethical consumption and ethical work, and you know you know, a lot of our listeners can probably identify with this kind of feeling of being stuck in a job that is, you know, opposed to your ethics or your morality or your politics or whatever. But like, you know, what's the last straw? At what point, you know, what kind of compromises is one, you know, willing to make because, you know, we all have to keep our heads above water in a capitalist society. But anyway, so at this job, there was this one guy in particular who was like, he was the top seller year after year after year. And he made like $500,000 a year, $600,000, $700,000 a year. You know, and if you would hear him on the phone, I mean, it's the kind of guy, you know, type A personality, you know, like salesman, could sell water to the ocean kind of guy. You know, if you hear him on the phone, though, he's a liar, he was a bully, he's a manipulator, he was a crook, and you know, to him, the most important thing in the world was money, and was acquiring money, and you know, living in material luxury and all that sort of stuff. But however, if you'd hear it in his own words, the most important thing in the world to him was Jesus Christ. Interesting. Right. So no, he went to this like prosperity gospel type church. Jesus. And like, you know, at work, like his office was like full of all this like various, you know, the religious iconography or whatever, little religious knickknacks and crosses and all sort of stuff, you know, all over, taped to the door outside of his office. He had all these flyers, you know, for events at his church. He would like try to evangelize at work and like invite people to come to his church with him. He would talk about about, I hear him on the phone, he'd talk about religion, like, because it's like those are the people that it's easiest to fleece money from, was the people that you can speak their language and you can relate to them, and this guy seemed to generally pick out other evangelical Christians because, like I said, he could put their minds at ease and, and they felt that they were dealing with one of their own. Now, he gave vast sums of money to his church, which certainly went to personally enrich his minister, although in his mind, this, certainly constituted charitable giving, allowed him to feel like a good person. One day, though, at work, he had what appeared to be a seizure. And when they took him to the hospital, they found that he had an inoperable brain tumor. So he's confident, right? He's confident he's going to beat the cancer. And he has a conversation with his minister. And in order to help his progress along, the preacher convinces him to empty his bank account and give it all to the church, to give all the money to God, sort of this act of this showing of faith to fully put himself into God's hands, right? So he does that. Gives all of his money to the church.
What?
And within a month, he's dead. What it illustrates to me is the way that this sort of hyper mutation of Protestantism, of evangelical Christianity that we have here in the United States sort of acts as this accelerant for capitalism. The way in which it absolves you instantly of any kind of guilt that you might have for your actions so that you never even have to think about it for a second. You can exploit people however you wish because, if it makes you rich and it makes you happy and if you benefit from it personally, well, especially if this prosperity gospel bullshit, well, then that must mean that it's God's will and everything's fine, and it's almost like it's like a modern day like Flannery O'Connor story to me. You know what I'm saying? It's like you have this man, he's contemptuous in every way, he's greedy, he's cruel, he's manipulative, full of these grotesque sort of character flaws, evident to everyone around him but himself, but in his own mind, he's saved. He's pure. He's forgiven, he's generous even, he's given a fortune to his church. How could he be a bad person? Of course, twist ending at the end in his last days is that he's then robbed of every penny, by this prosperity gospel minister, someone who's likely, far worse even than he is. Actually, I was watching Pervert's Guide to Ideology, and there's a part in there where Zizek he's talking about a quote that's commonly misattributed to Dostoevsky that says, if there's no God, then everything is permitted. And his counterpoint, right. You remember this part. His counterpoint then to that is that it's precisely because there is a God that everything is permitted to those who not only believe in God but who perceive themselves as instruments of divine will. So in other words, absolutely everything is permitted if you believe yourself to be operating as an instrument of God and that you're doing God's will.
The excellent cut there too is right as he says that, it cuts to 9/11.
9/11, right? Exactly. Yeah. But I was, I just watched that again the other night, and it made me think about this, and I felt it was worth mentioning for this episode. And this reproduces itself over and over and over and over again. There's a million preachers like this, in this country that prey on people like this, and leading these flocks of even greater millions of people, following this very perverse mutation of Christianity, because American Protestantism is so intertwined with capitalism and with the whole mythology of America itself. Even this sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps narrative that we have in this country fits so perfectly, with the ideology of Protestantism. These notions of forgiveness and redemption, overcoming adversity, faith and grace, all this sort of stuff. All these sort of things that make up the story of the American dream under capitalism. So with that being said, what we want to do this week is take a look at the few of the people, responsible, the televangelists responsible for spreading this ideology and, for greatly enriching themselves in the process. And what I wanted to do to start off is to talk a little bit about the story of Jim Bakker, who I think is perhaps the most despicable of them all. I don't know. He's there's a lot of them, but I mean, someone at least definitely the most thoroughly disgraced. Somebody who, in my view, is a grifter in the most naked and cynical way, and someone who, who all of the other big name televangelists won't even go near him anymore. But it wasn't always that way. Jim Bakker is in fact one of the most influential televangelists, someone who really, was there from the very beginning and really was responsible for building this, this vast television empire and media empire, and for really was one of the early models, of the modern televangelist. So Jim Bakker was born in Michigan in 1940. He went to North Central University in Minneapolis, which is, a Bible college affiliated with the Assemblies of God. Assemblies of God is a Pentecostal denomination. Pentecostal, for those who don't know, is sort of one of the wackier brands of Protestantism, known for faith healing and speaking in tongues and all that sort of nonsense. So it was while he was there in school at North Central that he met Tammy Faye LaValle, who he would then marry in 1961, who would become Tammy Faye Bakker, who would be his partner on television for the next several decades. They left college, became evangelists. They traveled all over the country in this sort of like tent revival, faith healing type tour. They'd sing and do puppet shows and all sort of stuff, and play accordion. What they really it kind of reminds me of, in a sort of way of like, and it's really this kind of split between him and Pat Robertson that I'll get into in a few years. But it really, what they reminded me of, I couldn't help but see Baby Billy and Amy Lee as these two. You know what I'm saying? As Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye. Like, they were like the puppet shows and the song and the dance and that sort of stuff. And like there's much more the more like glitz and glamour type ones. And I couldn't help but seeing Pat Robertson as the more Eli Gemstone figure in this story. So in 1965, Jim and Tammy Faye joined Pat Robertson at the Christian Broadcasting Network, which had only been founded a few years earlier. It was still a very kind of fledgling enterprise. Pat Robertson, as you all know, is he's still out there. He's like 90 years old. He's still out there on TV on the 700 Club every day, looking like he's on the verge of a stroke and like filling his diaper or whatever.
Which is weird because if I remember correctly, he was like famously putting up numbers on leg press or something. Do you remember that?
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Dwight, because I'm not going to talk about Pat Robertson too much, but there's something I just wanted to run down real quick, and I'll go ahead and do it since you brought it up, because we really should do like a second part to this episode where we talk more about Robertson and Falwell. Pat Robertson has maybe the single longest controversies page on Wikipedia that I've ever seen.
100%.
He has a whole separate page.
He's consistent.
Just for Pat Robertson controversies, and I think there's like 30 sections. Among them, here's some greatest hits. Calling non-Christians termites, first child conceived out of wedlock, comments on Islam, comments on Hinduism, comments on Scotland. It's financial ties to politicians, financial ties to African leaders, comments on assassinating Hugo Chavez. If you remember that one, he said we should just go ahead and do it. Comments on liberal professors. And it's funny you mentioned the leg press one, because that's the one I had forgotten about this one. So like back in 2005, he was like selling this like I don't know what it was, like some protein drink or like some, I imagine it like it being like an Ensure or something, like some kind of fucking like protein energy drink. And as part of his sales pitch for this drink that he was pitching, he was claiming that it made him able to leg press 2,000 pounds.
Unbelievable.
I looked, like the world record is like less than 1,300 pounds. You know what I'm saying? And Pat Robertson was like 76 years old at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows as well to expose how fucking gormless the corporate media is, that they like don't even investigate it at all, and they're just like, yeah, send it out. That's news.
Yeah, no, I'd completely forgotten about that one until I just saw it today. Like the world record setting leg press, like they literally had to, like, special accommodations needed to be made. Like they needed some kind of like customized like weight set to accommodate the large amount of weight. Like the guy who did it, like it was so strenuous for him that like he burst all the capillaries in both of his eyes when he was doing it. Like it was like just getting that one fucking push of like the world record 1,300 or whatever it was like so strenuous for this God. Record breaking bodybuilder to do. And then Pat Robertson is claiming, and not only did he claim he could do 2,000, he was claiming that his doctor could put up 2,700.
Fucking unreal, man.
So yeah, we could do a whole episode. Honestly, we could do a whole second part to this on Pat Robertson. So
we digress.
But I digress. So we all know Pat Robertson, but what's pretty generally forgotten, and really what Robertson has tried very hard to erase from history and to distance himself from, is that Jim Jim Bakker was the original host of the 700 Club. Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye, they joined CBN in 1965. Jim Bakker hosted the 700 Club from 65 to 72. They had their own show on the network. They were big personalities on Pat Robertson's network at the time. They had their own puppet show type show, like youth-based, like aimed at children. In fact, early on, as the legend goes, I found this really interesting article from 1988, right when all of Jim Bakker's big scandals were breaking. So Pat Robertson, who was actually running for president that year, he released like an authorized biography that year, which attempted to, because he was seeking office and because Jim Bakker had just been so thoroughly disgraced, he was trying to, distance himself from Jim Bakker. So he basically released this new biography, wrote Jim Bakker completely out of his personal history and out of the history of the network and everything. But 16 years earlier, in 1972, Pat Robertson published his own autobiography, and in that book, he speaks about Jim Bakker glowingly. Jim Bakker he credits him with saving the network in his early days. This one anecdote recalled that in 1965, the station is on the verge of bankruptcy, and they're having their Sunday night telethon, and Jim is moved by the Holy Spirit or whatever, and he's screaming and he's hollering, and tears are streaming down his cheeks, and it's then at the 0 hour that all the phone calls start pouring in. They need $40,000 to save the station. Jim is claiming on the air, and then that's when all God intervenes and everybody calls, and they raise 100 and something thousand, they more than double what they need or whatever. So I wanted to read real quick a section from this article, which I found really interesting. It's from the Washington Post, and like I said, this is from 1988. And to put that in context, like I said, this is when all of Jim Bakker's scandals are breaking, and Pat Robertson is trying to distance himself from that. So this article, it's you can tell it's meant to tell the story of Jim Bakker's time at CBN and the scandals that hadn't come out yet until this point. He's trying to get ahead of the story and break these stories first in the way that's going to protect Pat Robertson the most. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to put so much of the blame and everything on Jim Bakker. So and the cast Pat Robertson in the most positive light. So to read real quick. So like I said, Jim Bakker left in 1972. At the time, and what was claimed was that, him and Pat Robertson parted ways just because of philosophical differences. But, what came out 16 years later was this. This is what it says, reading from this. A rift began around 1971 when a new CBN production manager, Jerry Horseman, was asked by Robertson to analyze the network's spending. What he found, Horseman recalled in an interview this week, was that a disproportionate amount of the ministry's annual revenue, about $188,000 out of $900,000, was being spent on the Bakkers and their puppet show, more than any other CBN activity, including Robertson's own 700 Club. The report also documented that the Bakkers were charging CBN for thousands of dollars in personal expenses, including Tammy's hairdressing bills, clothing bills, and full-time secretary who also served as a babysitter for their daughter, Tammy Sue. Yeah, so to summarize, the Washington Post article, basically, Jim Bakker and Pat Robertson had this major falling out over 1971, 1972, which ended with Bakker leaving the network and going off on his own. 16 years later, the Robertson camp would sort of give more, try to, frame the split as Jim Bakker being forced out over his, misappropriation of CBN's funds, and he and his wife Tammy Faye driving Cadillacs and her wearing mink and them living in luxury and all this sort of stuff, which it's ironic, like I said, that this is coming from Pat Robertson because it's fucking Pat Robertson who's doing doing the exact same sort of stuff. Like I said, that's why this article is interesting, because it seems to be an attempt at damage control and kind of getting ahead of the narrative of this story and trying to frame Pat Robertson in the most positive light, because interestingly, like I said, this is 1988. Pat Robertson's running for president, which is something that is sort of forgotten that this ever even happened. That Pat Robertson ran for president. He actually finished second in the Iowa caucus. He came in second behind Bob Dole. He beat George Bush in the Iowa caucus. And I believe he actually won the primary. I think the only one he won was the state of Washington.
That is terrifying.
It is terrifying, absolutely. And it really, what it shows, I think, think, and again, this is something we could almost probably do a whole other episode about, is the power of Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, his political organization throughout the late 70s and the 80s, and how it really unlocked evangelical Christians as a voting bloc in the 80s. Because prior to that time period, evangelical Christians really didn't vote in numbers like they do today. There was this sort of principle, this traditional principle among Baptists, specifically like Falwell, to sort of keep religion and politics separated, right? And in the late 70s, the moral majority arose as this sort of reaction to in part the societal progress of the 1960s, liberalizing civil rights stuff, women, feminism type stuff, you know what I'm saying, like liberalizing factors in society, which Falwell ultimately saw by the late 70s as societal decay, which could only be blamed on a lack of morality among people. You know what I'm saying? So that's why he then organized this moral majority, which was very large at its peak in the 80s, very large and very potent political force. Did a lot of grassroots organizing and mobilizing Protestants, evangelical Christians in this country to vote for the right. Led Reagan to huge victories throughout the 80s, and not only that, it was really in 1994 the Newt Gingrich led Republican revolution, this sort of reaction to the election of Bill Clinton was really also harnessed that same sort of energy. It's the same sort of energy that like I said with the Ralph Reed article, that there's still so this is the Trump base to an extent as well. I mean, nobody, I'm not sure, I should have looked it up, but his Trump's popularity with evangelical Christians is probably higher than any other voting bloc in the country.
Yes, it is.
Across the board, they love him.
I've been seeing some kind of survey studies done in political science recently that show that that group of his base is the one that gives him the highest kind of approval rating.
They're never going anywhere.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, they're never going anywhere.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, they're all like 80 years old, so they're going to die off, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, they're going somewhere.
It's a shame that there's not a hell for them to go to. Yeah. Right. So like I said, Baker and Robertson, they part ways under bad terms in 72. Baker goes on to co-found the Trinity Broadcasting Network, which you may have also heard of. It's still out there. It's still a evangelical television network. And he starts his new show called the PTL Club, Praise the Lord, the Praise the Lord Club. And he hosts that show from 72 to 87. So this is interesting. Here's another sort of, I don't know if you've noticed, one of the things that you see sort of in the background from time to time in the Righteous Gemstones is that they have this, there on their property, they have this big amusement park. Like you see roller coasters, they have this big theme park there. In 1978, Jim Baker opened Heritage USA, which was a Christian theme park, amusement park, water park, all the whole 9 yards. Throughout the 80s, it was the third largest theme park in the country by attendance, only behind Disney World and Disneyland.
That is horrible.
Yeah, an average of 4.9 million visitors a year.
Jesus, why?
At its high point, it was earning $126 million per year, tax exempt, by the way.
Oh my God.
So the first really big murmurings of scandal for Baker came in 1979, when his PTL ministry came under investigation by the FCC for misusing funds he had raised on the air. What he claimed he was raising the funds for, he'd raised $350,000 that he told viewers was going to go towards, funding overseas missions, etc. But what it all actually went to was building his theme park, was building Heritage USA. The FCC report also found that, Jim and Tammy Faye had used, millions of dollars in PTL funds for personal expenses, etc. The FCC commission voted 4-3 to drop the investigation. I think I'm reading this.
What?
I'm reading this here from Wikipedia. After which they allowed Baker to sell the only TV station that he owned, therefore bypassing future FCC oversight. The FCC also forwarded their report to the Justice Department, who declined to press charges, citing insufficient evidence. Baker then used this controversy to raise more money from his audience. Branding, railing against the investigation, calling it a witch hunt. Asking viewers to call in and donate to, quote, give the devil a black eye. So then in 1985, there's another investigation. The IRS found $1.3 million in ministry funds that had been used for the Baker's personal benefit from 1980 to 1983. The report recommended that the PTL be stripped of its tax-exempt status, but no action was taken. There's this pattern that you see, like with the IRS and with the FCC through the 80s, of looking the other way say towards all these, financial crimes that are being committed by the Bakers. You know what I'm saying? But they're sort of looking the other way. And what it seems to me is that perhaps there was some political pressure by the Ronald Reagan administration, I would say, to not, go after a very wildly popular televangelist who was widely beloved by the people who had voted for him and made up his base. So really the bottom all falls out for Jim Bakker in 1987. 1987, his former secretary, Jessica Hahn, comes forward to accuse Bakker of drugging and raping her 7 years earlier in 1980. So supposedly, her claim, Bakker admitted to the sex, but he claimed it was consensual. What Jessica Hahn says was that, she was drugged and then raped by both him and another preacher, one of his associates, a guy named John Fletcher. John Fletcher, who also, a separate set of allegations, claims that he was raped by Jim Bakker and claims that he had sex with Jim Bakker on at least 3 different occasions. Bakker paid $279,000 from ministry funds to Jessica Hahn for her silence. This was around 1980, and it's not till 7 years later, that this all comes out. And this is the big kind of scandal that takes him down, and that really sees the end of PTL, sees the end of his ministry. He steps down as the chair of PTL. He hands control of the ministry over to Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell is leading it, trying to save the organization for 6 months until they finally have to file for bankruptcy and then dissolve it. After that, Jim Bakker steps down from the ministry. The ministry is dissolved, etc. Then in 1988, after a 16-month federal grand jury probe, he's indicted on 8 counts of mail fraud, 15 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy. In 1989, after a 5-week trial, they find him guilty on all 24 counts. He's sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, and they send him to federal prison in Minnesota. You want to take a guess who his cellmate was?
All right. Well, we've already. Okay. Let's see.
1989. You said
not Buddy Cianci. This is a federal prison. Should be.
Yes.
All right. Let's think. 1989. Minnesota. I was gonna say Ed Gein, but I don't know if that works out. It's got to be a serial killer. Am I in the right ballpark?
It's not a serial killer. I'll tell you that.
1989. Sirhan.
Nope. Shane.
Ted Kaczynski.
No, it's Lyndon LaRouche.
That's so much better.
It's so perfect. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Just imagine Lyndon LaRouche just red pilling him on the fucking the British royal family and world pedophile rings and.
Oh, if I could be a fly on the wall. If I could be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
I just found the answer to every further stupid question I'll ever get about if you could have a dinner party with 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be? I would just say those 2 guys and then a federal prosecutor.
Right. So he goes to prison in 89. He appeals his sentence. He had a 45-year sentence originally. It was reduced to, I believe, 12 years, of 5 of which he served, 5.5 he got out in the mid-90s. And then he wrote a book in 1996 called I Was Wrong, where...
man.
He doesn't actually seem to take any credit or to take any blame to really admit any wrongdoing in any of the things that anybody actually care about, like embezzling money, grifting people, raping somebody. He's not wrong about any of those things. But what he's wrong about is this Pentecostal notion of prosperity gospel. That's what he denounces, right? That's where he was wrong. He was wrong in saying that what God wants is for you to be rich. And so he says that this may or may not have something to do with him being defrocked, and being, basically excommunicated from the Pentecostal faith when all this shit happened. You know what I'm saying?
And also losing all his money. Now that I'm broke, I have a new idea.
Right. So he tries to say that, the first time he actually read the Bible all the way through was in prison, and that he realized where he did wrong in taking things out of context and, all this sort of stuff. And so this is, here is the great redemption arc of Jim Bakker. Here's, the great modern tale of redemption in modern Christianity is that Jim Bakker is back on television today.
What?
Oh, hell yes. Hell yes. Get him, let's bring him on the show.
Yeah. What is it, at Jim Baker?
He's got a new wife. Tammy Faye divorced him, and then she died in the 90s. He's got a new wife. He's got 5 adopted children. He's looking good. He's feeling good. He grew out his beard. He's on TV.
Chris, you have more followers than he does.
Do I really? He's got a Twitter account?
Yeah, it's Jim_Baker, Bakker.
Isn't it weird how it's spelled? Like, you want to say it Backer, don't you? Isn't it weird how it's spelled with 2 Ks?
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's put all the prosperity gospel stuff behind him. What he's doing now is he's preaching like full on like fire and brimstone type like end of days apocalypse stuff. Like he's preaching exclusively out of the book of Revelation nowadays.
Chris, I don't know how different that is from what we're doing, to be honest.
Well, the way it's different is that what he's doing is, and this is what is so just nakedly cynical about him. 30 years ago now, he was thoroughly scandalized and disgraced and exposed as a fraud and a thief and a grifter, right? He goes to prison for it. And what he's doing now, it's like, fuck it, mask off. What he's doing now is he's selling these survival food buckets. Have you seen this?
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
Hell yes.
He's like preying on, like, I'm sure his crowd largely made up of the bewildered elderly, you know what I mean? People, his fan base has got to be at least in their 80s, you know what I'm saying? And he's preying on these people's fears of the end times, right? By selling them these buckets, and they're like $5,000. They're like extremely expensive, these buckets.
Well, you can't put a price on security in the apocalypse.
No, that's right.
I mean, you can. It's $5,000.
What's funny too, when you really think about it, it all sort of falls apart, because the ironic thing is that, like, you would think that the people watching his show would believe that they're the ones that are going to be saved, right? Like they're the ones that are going to be raptured into heaven. So why would they need the survival food bucket? You know what I'm saying?
Imagine the person who's watching it who like believes that worldview, but also places themselves in the shitty person category, and like knows they're like, okay, well, there's definitely going to be a rapture, but when that happens, I'm definitely not coming up.
I gotta hedge my bets, man.
Yeah, I gotta become like the horrible cannibalistic warlord of whatever godless earth is left, and step one in that is having my bucket.
Absolutely. I recommend you guys watch. I'll drop it in the group DM or something. But I don't know if you know Vic Berger, the guy that edits those videos in a really funny way.
Fantastic.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
He had a whole series a couple years ago of sections of Jim Baker's new television show where he's selling the buckets. He's like telling you how the bucket, it can be used for a table, like it's a chair. It's got all these other uses, like in addition to being survival. I mean, it's just absolutely cynical grifting.
One of the things we've done around here, we stick them under coffee tables and end tables. You just stack them up and then put a cloth over them.
Yeah.
Or get a piece of, cardboard or a piece of plywood, and you make a top, and then you just stack this food. You could have your whole living room with end tables and coffee tables made out of food buckets.
And again, like I said, that's the way in which evangelical Christianity absolves you from any sort of guilt about doing this sort of thing. Like, I know, Shane, I've heard you talk about this a lot before, in that, like, this question is always asked, like, is this person a true believer, or is this person grifting?
Right.
You know, both of those things are able to exist simultaneously in the same person.
And I mean, in fact, you can make the argument that depending on the specific like constellation of that person's worldview, it might be necessary to have both of those things in operation. You know, like in order for the grift to be successful, you actually have to believe what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Jim Baker, you know, that'll wrap that up. But, you know, like I said, it reminds me of this guy that I worked with. You know, this incredibly, sort of vivacious, like charismatic kind of figure, you know, that has this ability to, you know, set aside any sense of ethics or any sort of moral compass to, you know, nakedly grift people in this sort of way, all in the name of, you know, faith, because if it makes me happy and it makes my life better, I'm an instrument of God's will. I'm an instrument of the divine will. What I'm doing can't possibly be wrong. Like, you have to believe that. So that's that.
No. I think if you're interested in making sure that you could survive the potential reckoning, saying that you want to go to somewhere where you can purchase MREs that have been discounted at a rate of like 3% from Desert Storm from the Department of Defense that he could buy and flip for a tidy 500% profit. If that's not reasonable for an evangelical, a charismatic evangelical grifting preacher, I don't know what is. All right, Shane. I think it's time to bring the pain train on this one. Let's hit it.
Oh boy, where do I even begin with this guy? I think, Chris, me and you have talked about our buddy Tony a while.
Tony? Oh, man.
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking today about this guy, Tony Alamo. And I want to make it clear that his name apparently specifies that it's pronounced Alamo, but it's spelled like the Alamo, and I'm going to call him Tony Alamo for the remainder of this, and eventually I'll come around to why. But Tony Alamo is another one of these evangelical types, also Pentecostal in that same tradition as the others that people are generally familiar with. Also had his own TV show, had a long-standing radio broadcast, had a sort of whole media empire built around his preaching, and that's how I initially came to know of him. So I think as some of our listeners have made it apparent in various comments, you may or may not know I'm from New York City.
There it is.
So growing up, I, for the most part, have been kind of separated from this particular weirdness that's in the American psyche, except I've had exposure to Tony Alamo, although I probably shouldn't say exposure, again, given where this is going.
Oh, God.
But the reason is my neighborhood, when I was growing up in the city, was like every week would be blanketed with his newsletters and his flyers, and the name of his church was the Tony Alamo New Jerusalem Ministries. And if anybody has ever encountered him before, it's likely through this like just insane production of newsletters that he's put out. It has this incredibly gaudy format, this header, everything is like incredibly oversaturated, and there's like halation on every potential thing. Anytime there's a photograph in it, they're very colorful. His style is very much born out of, the 80s, late 70s and 80s, which is for a lot of these guys their sort of heyday or their moment where they came into the fore.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so before I get into too much of who he is, I'm just going to quickly read off a few of the headlines, because this is what caught my eye as a sort of teenager as I was encountering this stuff. This was a form of preaching, right? To like try to get new people, especially in a sinful city like New York, right? Like to get new people interested. So a couple of famous headlines from him, the Pope's Secrets, and this has a great little picture of the Pope doing like that kind of funny eyeglass thing with your fingers.
Oh my God, I remember that picture.
Yeah. Jesus said that Satan would have a church and government. Mm-hmm. The Queen of Whores. Mm-hmm. Another Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty positive that one's in relation to 9/11.
Oh.
This one is great. This is the full headline here. Evil international Roman Catholic government agents are claiming to be United States agents of America.
Where's the lie? Where's the lie?
Mick Mulvaney, I'm looking at you.
As I'm going through this, kind of starting here again through the way that I came into contact with him, I would pick up every single one of these. Oh, and the most famous one, I'm sorry, before I get off the headlines themselves, is just in full black letters at the top of his newsletter, God is a terrorist, which is just an amazing headline, particularly in the midst of the war on terror, which is when I was encountering these objects. So, I would read these pretty religiously, pun intended, to get a sense of what they're about. And my general understanding of the worldview, after having read about maybe a dozen or so of these newsletters front to back, is that there is a secret Illuminati-esque conspiracy in the world that runs everything. And this conspiracy includes primarily the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope, who is at any given time, depending on who the Pope is, may or may not be the Antichrist.
Check.
All right.
And they are in league with the United States government, which, of course, the federal government is also a party to this, hence that previous headline, but they're part of this conspiracy.
I'm okay with this so far.
They're also in league with a secret cabal of Jews who run the world's finances in order to push a homosexual agenda via the media.
Do we got the royal family in here?
I have not found any royal family connections yet, so maybe he could have learned something from LaRouche. But
yeah, because I say that this sounds like what Jim Baker and Lyndon LaRouche would have come up with.
And then most interestingly, especially given the fact that that, obviously part of this conspiracy involves this Jewish cabal. Also, the Nazis are a part of this conspiracy, like the actual Nazis, and they're all, they want to bring about a Fourth Reich involving the Roman Catholic Church and the United States government.
Okay.
And the overarching goal of this Illuminati-esque conspiracy is to convince the good, patriotic, God-fearing people of America that Tony Alamo fucks kids. When in fact, if you read the newsletters, as it says over and over again, he does not. All right? He absolutely does not. Now, of course, interestingly, at this particular time in his life, he was under federal investigation for, trafficking young children. And eventually he did go to jail for that in 2009. And he spent the rest of his life, he got a sentence. I believe the judge gave him the harshest sentence possible for the various crimes he was convicted of. And so he got 175 years, which even with the love of God would be a hard rap to beat. And he did die recently.
Good for him.
Just a few years ago, in 2017, he died in a federal prison. Yeah, so obviously he's an interesting, colorful character, to say the least. Again, the thing that kind of was so bizarre about him, and I think that sets him apart a little bit from some of the bigger names and better known of these TV evangelicals, is his degree of showmanship. Investigating into the background of his life, and one of the reasons why I say Tony Alamo as opposed to the way that he insists on it being pronounced, which is Tony Alamo, is that he was originally born Jewish in the Midwest, and his name was Bernie Lazar Hoffman.
No way.
No kidding.
And he was born in the 30s. In the 1960s, he, like a lot of other young people across the country, went to California. He went to Los Angeles with the intention of becoming some kind of musician or, in the music business. And this was in the middle of the 60s. He was very much one of these kind of like hippie drifter guys who went there. His contemporaries being people like Manson, obviously.
I was just going to say, yeah.
He had, at a certain point, presumably at the end of some intense drug bender or something, this huge supernatural revelation, much like a friend of the show, Osama bin Laden, did. And he realized that, in fact, this horrible, sinful life that he was living was awful, and instead he should live a full Christian life. And so exactly how the turn from this, Jewish, music-tied, drug-tied hippie becomes this, like, evangelical preacher, it's a little bit weird. He did meet his wife, who is the love of his life, like a lot of these guys had, a long-term partner. She was also, I believe, Jewish, and she came from Arkansas. Her name was Edith Opal Horn, and they got married in Las Vegas in the 60s, and that's when they changed their name to Tony Alamo and Susan Alamo. And so that's why I insist on calling it Alamo, because it's very obviously this attempt to like rebrand and re-identify oneself with this very specific American kind of affect, right? Like, because you could change your name to something that sounds a little bit more biblical, but the name Tony Alamo, right?
It's great.
From that point on, basically from the 60s until all the way through to the 80s, the best way I could describe it is like an Elvis impersonator.
I was just going to say.
Like, he had this like really intense coiffed hair. He always wore these like dark aviators, and he would wear these incredibly flamboyant outfits, usually these sort of like these suits, like rhinestone suits, and these, obviously had this a flair for musical aesthetic. And it's very interesting as well because he obviously created this media empire. Like I said, they had a TV show, a radio show, and they made money in the way that a lot of these guys did via, sort of telethons and, the kind of new idea of like tithing, right? Like a reimagined idea of tithing, like, please send us a percentage of your money to help support the church along. But the most lucrative venture of his, and he continued to do this, he started doing this, I believe, before he founded the church, but he created denim jackets, rhinestone-infused designer denim jackets.
Very timely, to his credit.
And they were extremely popular in LA. I mean, these jackets would go for sometimes several $1,000s a piece. They were not particularly religious themed, but if you're trying to picture what they look like, you've probably seen them without even realizing them. They were so popular in the mid-'80s that very famous musicians used them, such as no less than Michael Jackson, on the cover of the Bad album. He's wearing a Tony Alamo jacket.
Get the fuck out of here. If only there was a connection.
And a whole bunch of other ones. Dolly Parton, James Brown, Elvis Presley, Liberace, Prince, Madonna, Mr. T, and most recently, in 2013, Miley Cyrus was wearing a Tony Alamo jacket. And that's interesting to note because that's 4 years after he was convicted of being, trafficking young women. So he basically had this, kind of large empire and grift, all very connected, like a lot of these guys were, for all the shit that they throw at you about, living like a stoic, true life. He was highly connected to this kind of circle of media influencers and, famous, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. And that's obviously reflected in a lot of the ways that he dressed and the way that he acted, the way that he would perform when he was doing his preaching. And there's the, kind of well-trod irony there of like the hypocrisy of living such a lifestyle while preaching this out of the side of your mouth. I desperately tried to find a picture of him hanging out with Donald Trump, but I couldn't. On the topic of the jackets as well, right? Like, this is an interesting thing. Actually, one of our another actual friend to the show, Babs, let me know that there even up until a few years ago, he had a music wardrobe supply store in Nashville, the store which was just called Alamo, and you would go in and you could buy a bunch of accessories for performances and things like that. And like a few of these other guys, as well as I was thinking about like a sort of Scientology, how it had a similar connection, right, to, and it continues to do with like Hollywood or whatever. There are people who eventually left his ministry, and they formed a number of like antagonistic organizations that tried to expose the truth about this guy. And so just a quick word from one of these, it's called TonyAlamoNews.com, is a quick word. This is, all information that was basically relayed by former members of the church about his rhinestone jackets. Little do the buyers know of these jackets, not only did Alamo get free labor from his followers, meaning the people who would come into his church, but he used to force their children to work on putting the rhinestones on those jackets as well. Alamo realized that their small hands and fingers were perfect for handling the delicate rhinestone. They were directed to report to the warehouses directly after school and worked until as late as 10 p.m. in the evening. They were never compensated for their efforts.
Slaves, all right.
So this guy basically, in pursuit of developing his Christian media empire, used like child labor, one could argue as sort of child slavery, right? And basically under sweatshop conditions in the United States. A brief eBay search will show that some of these jackets are still available. If we have any enterprising listeners who would like to buy some and send this to them. Yeah, I mean, he was eventually caught. Got caught up in a bunch of IRS scandals, like a bunch of these other guys. It seemed, according to his many followers, he really lost his shit after his wife died in the 80s. He was purportedly married. I couldn't get a clear number on this, but possibly 8 more times. A number of the eventual counts that came against him in terms of like child trafficking, these were young women who he would marry or sort of, forced to marry in some kind of bizarre ceremony in one of his various compounds. He while this investigation was undergoing, his defense in part was he said, quote, "Consent is puberty," end quote.
What the fuck?
And so I think the youngest person that he was purported to have involved himself in this manner was 9 years old.
Jesus fucking Christ.
But obviously there were a whole host of others. A lot of these details are a little obfuscated because of, obviously, to protect the unfortunate victims of this.
What the fuck?
But there were quite a number of them. There's a picture here. I will also drop this one in the DM right now. There's a picture here of him after his arrest and being led into prison, I believe, during the trial. And he still got that same kind of look, although, of course, now he's balding. And really, unfortunately, this picture of him and the way that he's smiling very creepily towards the camera, he looks quite a bit like Drill.
I was just thinking that. I was just thinking that. Yes, he does.
I'm going to send this picture to you guys right now.
I saw that picture.
So, obviously a deeply evil person. His ministry is still active today, from what I can get a sense of. Even when he was in prison, they were still producing material. Again, all of the conspiratorial material basically claiming that, he was wrongfully imprisoned and that there's, all of these agents of the devil or whatever are working to convince you that he actually did these crimes, when in reality he's innocent and he's a man of God, and all of that kind of stuff that people are familiar with. But what I think about it, in terms of what's really interesting about him, with this connection to the whole kind of like show busy angle of him, and the fact that like he volunteered into this life. I mean, all of these guys did to a certain extent, and in a weird way, these are, at least with Tony Alamo, he's also a self-made man. I couldn't get an exact number on his figures, but he owned tons of properties. At some point in the 90s, he was estimated to have a net worth of around $60 million.
Jesus.
Again, it's all obfuscated through a number of different schemes of different people, of members of his church holding the properties. He built this empire, a lot of which, as many of these guys have done, included creating missions in developing countries in the third world, right? That really helps expand your base and, looks very good on paper, right? Like, we're going to create this charity mission in Central Africa or whatever, in this, like, really destitute area. But that's also obviously a way to be like a foot in the door in order to reach people who are in desperate need of some kind of help, and then you provide them with that help and then add onto it this kind of preaching component. But the two things, of specific, I think, kind of takeaway points here, is the first one, to that last point about that setting up of the missionary work, right? Tony had actually started his career by doing that, except in the United States, and particularly in LA. And he did it specifically among the community of people like him who were like hippie drifters, right? Because what had happened at that moment, as I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the history, you did, as part of the outgrowth of that subculture, you ended up having, huge amounts of sort of wayward young people who really didn't know what to do with their lives, and who probably got involved in drugs or other kinds of criminal activities, or somehow ended up, homeless or destitute, having traveled across the country to go to LA or San Francisco or whatever. And then here comes him, he would create these like sort of soup kitchens and shelters and things. He would bring them in and then he would preach to them. And that was the way that he started his empire, based essentially on, kind of broken people. Interestingly, and I did not know this until I was diving into this, but the term Jesus freaks is actually attributed to his early group.
Oh, really?
Really?
Oh, then I am familiar with them. Yeah.
Specifically because, the idea of like freaks, like that as vernacular,
right. There's a hippie thing.
Was a hippie thing, like, let your freak flag fly or whatever. And so since these were like hippies that had turned to Jesus, they were called Jesus freaks.
Interesting.
So that's a little feather in the cap for our, a little takeaway. So when his wife died in the 80s, and this also kind of made me think of the gemstones again. Instead of burying her, he had her body embalmed.
Oh, no.
And was placed in a heart-shaped, like, open thing that they had constructed, like a mausoleum.
What?
And he kept preaching to his followers, and they would hold service in this building, and he kept preaching that she was going to resurrect, and she was going to come back to life. And he did this for 6 months. Eventually, he put her into a crypt, and then I believe it was one of the children later tried to, like, when he had first, because he got arrested multiple times, of course. When he first got arrested in the 90s, like, the kid went to go get the mom out, and the mom's body was gone. So he had taken the body and like hidden it, and he only then many years later returned the body.
Well, maybe she actually resurrected and she was just out hanging out, walking
She
around.
walks among
Shane,
us.
what the fuck are you telling us, man? What
Yeah,
the fuck? Are you fucking serious?
I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention that crucial detail. Yeah.
Are you fucking? I thought you were like, because you always get me with this shit, like with the fucking 9/11 pizza thing, and I thought this was like a lead up to like a Remember the Alamo joke.
No. He really did this.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it wasn't until eventually he was threatened with jail over it that he produced the body. Who knows where he was keeping it or what he was doing. And again, this speaks to the sense of like, I mean, nobody would do that if they didn't have some really intense, serious belief about it. I mean, because there was no grift to be made out of that. Like, he obviously was off the deep end and had some kind of attachment to this, to his wife and belief in, some kind of eternal life or something.
Horrible.
So the idea that we should totally discriminate and categorize these people as either like hypocrites or, fanatics, I think there's It's very possible to be both.
You're
and
right.
I think he's a prime example of it.
Wow.
Also insanely rich, and I will say in a little act of justice, as far as I could tell, almost all of his money, at least the money that he couldn't squirrel away, was inevitably taken from him in a series of lawsuits that kind of followed these criminal proceedings and distributed to the many victims of him and his awful church.
That's good.
So that's at least one nice thing that happened.
Sure, the rest of it was seized by the government to make the F-35.
But I think the other kind of much more psychologically interesting thing to me here, and I already mentioned it a little. Again, this guy was born Jewish. He didn't have any familial ties to this, you know? Like, he didn't really have this upbringing. So, in a way, his adoption of this is like a weird reflection of the sort of American zeitgeist.
I was thinking that, yeah.
It's like almost like if you had like an alien, right? And you bring them down and show them just like snippets of a little culture and then ask them to like, can you perform this? Can you repeat this back to us? And seeing what the things that they picked up on are. And in his particular case, it's like Elvis Presley.
Rhinestones, yeah.
Yep.
Celebrity culture,
Sure.
Hollywood, glitz and glamour, Pentecostal, like totally insane and delusional kind of version of Christianity, and like the total excess and wealth of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of those things put together, right? It's just like a perfect mid-century American sandwich of just every weird thing that one might pick up on in that time, and then as well, even with as we were saying, like we're joking about like the LaRouchian kind of conspiracy and the whole conspiratorial element that you see through a lot of these guys' worldview. Yeah. It's not unlike, although it might be different content, it's not unlike the conspiracy grifters that we see today that are really famous, right? Because part of the whole like performance of conspiracy is to say the conspiracy is against like me and my followers, right? The conspiracy is against you. And what that does, this is like the step one of like a kind of cult relationship, ultimately, right? The idea is that you are under siege, right? You are under siege from the forces of evil, and I'm the only one who can provide the truth. And it just so happens you can easily catch the truth at 7 p.m. Eastern time on TV for a mere 10 to 15% of your income. And that's a very powerful kind of messaging, as silly and ridiculous as the performance of it may be.
Well, real quick, this is off topic, but all I could think about when you were telling the story of Tony Alamo going out west and changing his name and all that sort of stuff, it reminded me of the story of another young Jewish man grew up in New York City by the name of Michael Weiner, who in the 70s, he went out west. He went to California. He worked for Timothy Leary. He studied at the University of California, Berkeley. He was very close friends and close admirers of Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and he sought to sort of model himself as a beat poet, in their image. He was friends with them for years. This man named Michael Weiner went on to change his name to Michael Savage. He is now
Stop.
There you go.
Are you serious?
Famous xenophobic and homophobic conservative radio pundit Michael Savage.
Very weird. Damn, he is old. He's 77.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, weird people. And again, as I've pointed out with a few of the people on our program, Tony Alamo being dead, you can say whatever the fuck you want against him. You will not be held and liable. Fuck him. Glad he's dead.
Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah, let's do it.
You're gonna hate this. You're gonna hate this. I don't know what to say. I mean, he's a very interesting evangelical grifter. Before we get into like an inventory on his background, I will say just straight off the bat, he is worth right now, and I believe he's 82 years old. He is worth $750 million.
Holy shit!
Tax-free.
Of course.
He's worth $750 million. So let's take a look into his little bit into his origin story here. Born in 1936 in West Texas, he grew up near an army base, which inspired him to pursue his pilot's license. Before his career as a pilot, though, he interestingly had a short career as a singer and actually peaked on the top 40 in 1957 with a song called "Pledge of Love," which, like most music in the 1950s, fucking sucked.
Oh, no way. Did you listen to it?
So I can't let you go. I must make you see you mean more to me than each beat.
his brief career ended, and he went in search of another form of entertainment, the Word of God. He enrolled in Oral Roberts University.
Yes.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma.
One of the granddaddies of them all.
That's correct, where he then became a close friend of Oral Roberts himself and ultimately became his chauffeur and personal pilot, and was able to get a front seat view of the style of a grifting legend of that kind of charismatic evangelicalism. He is, in fact, Kenneth Copeland is a defender of the institution of marriage, a virtue he himself holds dear, and we know so because as an enthusiast of marriage, he has been married himself 3 separate times. Being completely honest, I, as a person, don't really have a lot of exposure to evangelicalism in my life, kind of limited exposure, and so I felt like I was kind of going into this with fresh eyes. And to be honest, I kind of assumed that like many other large institutional religions, evangelicalism would kind of hide the money aspect of this pretty well and only kind of have the implication of the quid pro quo indulgences. But Lord fucking help me, was I wrong. Money and finance is very much a focus of the Kenneth Copeland Ministries. And starting with the About Us portion of their ministry's website, it says as follows: "We are called to teach Christians, just like you, how to overcome life's obstacles and to live in victory by applying principles found in the Bible. The wisdom of God's Word can help you with any situation in which you may find yourself. Generally, our teachings fall within one of these categories: finances, relationships, healing, prayer, faith, life and work, and spiritual growth." So the fact that they start with finances does not feel like a mistake, because under the section called Our Testimony, here's a little bit of a lead up to what they're ultimately going for. It states as follows: "We," and this is talking about Kenneth Copeland and his wife, "we both started out just like any two people who haven't been taught to put their faith in God's Word, and it definitely showed in our lives. We were broke, in debt up to our eyeballs, sick and flat out discouraged. Then one day, we made a quality decision to make Jesus the Lord of our lives and put our trust in God and base our lives in His Word. If a situation in our lives didn't line up with what we'd read in the Bible, we changed it. That decision made all the difference, and it literally changes everything." And he goes on to say, "If you'd like to join us in our mission, please consider partnering with us." And there's a link. Now, this is where it gets a little funky. When you go to the section about becoming a partner, it reads as follows: "Partnership is a bridge. Partnership is much more than being on a mailing list. It is sacred to Kenneth Copeland. Why? Because partnership is a covenant, a joining together in faith. And partnership is like a bridge. It's the great connector that joins those who fund the work of the ministry with the work itself. And it is upheld by the 2 pillars of prayer and financial support." Number 1, financial support. A partner commits to funding the work of the ministry with gifts, contributions, and tithes and offerings. Brother Copeland is quick to point out Philippians, am I saying that right, guys?
Yes, I believe so.
Philippians 4:17, "Not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may be abound to your account." And 2, mutual prayer support. A partner commits to pray for the work of the ministry, just as Kenneth and Gloria pray for KCM members every day. KCM is Kenneth Copeland Ministries. The bridge of partnership is not a one-way street, but a mutual connection that offers two-way exchange. And he says, from partners to KCM, flow prayer and financial contributions. And from KCM to the partners, flow prayer, shared rewards, and anointing. Honestly, I don't know what they're trying to hide here or what they're trying to say. It just seems to me that, like, again, I don't think I know enough about the lifestyles and beliefs of evangelicals to really make a judgment call on this, but it seems to me like the same grift as like a psychic, basically saying like, your financial contribution will beget not only spiritual salvation for eternity, but also the windfalls in your personal financial situation on this earthly plane.
Well, the thing about Christianity is that, the reason they can be so open with the money thing and soliciting contributions and donations or whatever is that it's literally in the Bible, the tithe. You know what I'm saying? 10% of your income goes to the church. Like, that's the bare minimum to be a good practicing Christian. Like, that's your duty. That's what's expected of you as a baseline.
Right.
And that gives them the justification then they never have to feel guilty or bad, or it never has to look unreasonable for them to ask for that money.
Chris, you might remember this, and tell me if I'm wrong. That was part of Ben Carson's 2012 presidential candidacy.
Probably.
Or 2012 or 2016. His tax plan was like, I want 10% because that's a tithe, and I think it's really good. So Under this the partners section here, they continue by laying out 6 points of promises for the partnership program, which is 1, prayer is one of the most important aspects of partnership. 2, it's not just about money. Kind of is.
No.
3, we are good stewards of every gift, and each one is twice sown. No idea what that means. 4, you will hear from Kenneth Copeland personally, and then it says parenthetically, in a monthly letter. 5, you will never run out of word-based teaching, which we'll talk about in a second. And 6, your information will never be shared. Overall, yeah, I think this seems like this is a big chunk of the reason that Kenneth Copeland himself is worth $750 million. But again, finances seem to play a large role in the ministry's mission. Any mention of the problems you may have in your life that you're turning to God for, finance leads the conversation. To illustrate this, here are some of the headlines that the ministry offers as talks, aside from Kenneth Copeland's Prayer for Prosperity, which we should probably actually play right now.
Just stand up before the devil and say, in the name of Jesus, you spirit of fear, you spirit of lack, I'll never be broke another day in my life. I'm not a taker, I'm a giver. Stand on the word of God and be blessed.
It's fucking bizarre. And aside from this, here are some of the headlines that the ministry offers. God delights in your prosperity. 6 scriptures to help you trust Jesus with your finances. Scriptures to stand against debt. Scriptures on giving. Scriptures on dealing with uncertainty. Scriptures for beating financial pressure. Scriptures for demolishing debt. So if you put this in kind of like the larger American context, we know that 40% of American households could not cover an unexpected payment of $400 or more. So maybe this is how people get caught up in this kind of promissory salvation that the Copeland ministries are preaching. But there's fucking hours and hours and hours of Kenneth Copeland and his family members, all of whom are involved in the ministry, talking about finances. Just go on YouTube and just look up Kenneth Copeland finances. It's just endless. So it's even more troubling when we look at some of the financial scandals that have enveloped the Kenneth Copeland ministries. And I think it's fair to say that for many years, the Kenneth Copeland ministries have been embroiled in many, many, many scandals and many, many, many reasons to believe that Copeland and his family directly benefit from the tax-exempt status of the ministries. So here's a few gemstones for you, if I may. Oh, watch out. Dwight's punny.
Dwight, you might be misbehaving a little bit.
Kenneth Copeland Ministries has taken advantage of the FAA program that keeps flights private from tracking websites. And the ministry owns 5 such aircraft whose flights are kept private.
That's good for all those trips to Little St. James. Allegedly.
I'm
alleging right now with absolutely no evidence.
Well, you're going to hear about some Caribbean trips. United States Senator Chuck Grassley, of all people, has questioned some of the flights taken by these aircraft, including layovers in Maui, Fiji, and Honolulu, to which the ministries explain the stopovers were for preaching or allowing the pilots to rest.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Gotta rest.
I mean, it's a long flight from Maui to Fiji, so you have to stop over in them, in between traveling to these Pacific paradises.
One of my favorite controversies here was of the Angel Flight 44 deal. Basically, the gist of it was that Kenneth Copeland, at some point in his career, had promised to form an aviation ministry. Now, this reared its head when Haiti had the absolutely devastating earthquake, and he enlisted another pastor out of, I think, Louisiana, named Reverend Rich Vermillion, also a pilot, to head the endeavor. He had even tried to raise money from his ministry for the effort, but it never came to fruition. And the Reverend stated, and actually wrote a book about this called Angel Flight 44, and he said, it's as if Kenneth Copeland had never said such a ministry had already been formed, nor had repeatedly promised that such an aviation support ministry would be further developed and ready for disasters, such as that which just occurred in Haiti a few days ago. Now, in a statement, this hurts, man. All right. In a statement, Kenneth Copeland Ministries highlighted that it did make one of its aircraft available during the Hurricane Katrina disaster in 2006, and also investigated the possibility of providing such assistance to future disasters. But a spokesman, Dr. Stephen Swisher, Dr. Swisher Sweets, told the Christian Post this was not a specific promise with a timeline attached. However, according to Swisher, Angel Flight 44 had collected $8,000 in donations, but it had been spent on plane repairs. And he said, currently, the aircraft has structural issues, and it's not an airworthy condition, and they're lacking funds to buy a new aircraft, in addition, of course, to their 4 planes that they already have. And he says, however, it is our desire to have an aircraft to fly assistance during disaster relief efforts. We are believing God for the finances to have a fleet of aircraft to use for such instances. So they did nothing, is the answer.
Right.
They did fuck all.
Just quickly to interrupt, I do remember this. One of the other reasons why they eventually canceled the idea of doing the aviation ministry is they couldn't get Muhammad Atta.
Oh, no.
I had to. I'm sorry.
Another scandal, and this may seem quaint now, there was a scandal in 2008 where Mike Huckabee was running for president and used campaign fund. Yeah, friend of the show, Mike Huckabee.
Oh, speaking of Mike Huckabee, I forgot to mention that, he was working, he was very instrumental in the early organization of Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority back in the late 70s. That's where Huckabee got his start as one of the communications directors for one of these organizations, one of these branches of the Moral Majority.
That was before his campaign ended in 2008, and directly after which he started eating 6,500 calories per day to get up to fighting weight to then go defend President Trump.
Yeah, when Mike Huckabee travels around the country, he really travels around the country. You know what I mean, guys?
This is before he made sure that his son was killing dogs on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Look it up, folks. Look it up.
His show is so fucking bad. Did you guys ever watch his show on Fox?
I've watched this show, yeah.
Yeah, it collapsed immediately.
Did you see the so this is a weird tangent, but the guy, the one guy from the band Korn that became a born-again Christian? Did you see the video that circulated online?
That's Head, if I'm not mistaken.
It is Head. The guy, there's a video
Monkey.
that circulated a few months ago of like one of the like Huckabee, well-known fucking bass player. That's his thing. He likes to play music on his show, and he had Head from Korn on his television show and got to jam out with him. Watch that video, man. It's one of the most bizarre, just surreal things you could imagine seeing.
I realize that when the two of us are on stage together, it may not look like that we actually blend, but we do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Which is, it's fucking weird because, like, you think about, like, when Mike Huckabee plays bass, it's all in these kind of, like, 1-4-5 sort of, like, easy triad sort of music. And then Head in Korn would do these, like, complete dissonant Mr. Bungle chords. It's, like, the least kind of, like, gospel-sounding music maybe of all time. So, yeah, Mike Huckabee, to put a cap on this, he used campaign funds to rent a space from the Kenneth Copeland Ministries, and as a result, that's what sparked the United States Senate inquiry into the tax-exempt status of religious organizations. The Copelands responded with a financial statement and created a propaganda website called Believers Stand United to help explain their perspective. And then Kenneth Copeland and his wife were put under the spotlight by a 2015 episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, talking about how the Copelands used tax laws to live in a $6.3 million mansion as part of their parsonage allowance for their home, which is, of course, not subjected to taxes, and using what I want to talk about now, $20 million to buy a jet. This is my favorite Kenneth Copeland scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Copeland Ministry bought a multi-million dollar, $20 million Gulfstream 5 jet, in which this video, which I'm going to play a clip of now, thanked his followers and Jesus for buying it when it was delivered to his Fort Worth airstrip.
January the 12th, 2018, we took possession of the Gulfstream 5, and we give God praise for it and thanksgiving. It is debt-free. This is a debt-free airplane for Kenneth Copeland Ministries to do the work of the gospel all over the world. And we want you to stand in agreement with us right now. We're believing for the equipment necessary for this. We're believing for the extension of the runways, and also it needs a home. It needs a new hangar.
So keep in mind here, he's talking about the partners of the ministry that gave them their money to be able to afford the Gulfstream 5 jet plane. And this led to one of my absolute favorite public freakouts of all time, which was that in May of this year, in 2019, Kenneth Copeland was confronted by an Inside Edition reporter at his airport in Newark, Texas.
How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business, but...
Isn't it the business of your donors?
Listen, I paid. You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
You said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did.
Yeah, so basically she's confronting him for what he said was, I can't do what I need to do in the ministry because I would have to fly, in a tube full of demons. Flying commercial. He can't fly commercial.
Can't fly commercial, and I have to be able to communicate with God. I can't do that in a tube full of, I believe he also said dope-filled as well, dope-filled demons, which is how he views the common person.
I've watched this video about 1 million times in long form and in the short version as well. And the body language and like caught off guardedness that Copeland is doing here is fucking delightful.
Oh, he's frightening. I think almost certainly watching that video, I can almost certainly, I believe that he abuses prescription amphetamines or something.
So what's weird about that is that you can see his gears turn and like his face contort, just like trying to think of the best approach. But he changes it as time goes on. It's like you can see his frustration when he realizes like, oh man, like I'm a really good grifter and a swindler and I've been doing so for decades, but I'm totally boning it right now. Right. Like he's not doing it, and it's fucking fascinating. He just tries different iterations. He's like, let me try incredulousness. Let me try straight up outrage. Let me try vindictiveness. Let me try aloofness. And none of it is playing, and he just looks like an idiot with capped teeth. Like historically, do grifters always exist like this? Maybe, probably. I mean, maybe is the family structure of evangelicalism a fascistic one that disincentivizes dissent and therefore disallows any structural critique of our political economy that's driving thousands of people away to pay for indulgences and hope for financial salvation instead of turn against capitalism? Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yes. But I mean,
yes.
I think
next question.
I think for certain, Kenneth Copeland is probably honestly going to die. I mean, without paying any recompense for his swindling, and for sure, he's not going to fucking pay any taxes before he dies on God's green earth here. And what's more certain, he's certainly not going to fucking fly commercial. Kenneth Copeland, God is dead and you killed him.
Well, here's maybe just a general little, like, sort of wrap-up political question or lesson, or, I don't know, angering. Well, angry statement. There you go.
That is our brand.
I think one of the nice things that's been happening in this resuscitation of some kind of, like, social democratic vision that has happened in the last few years where, you find, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, I would imagine you have, probably a lot of our listeners have, where you have certain politicians who are coming up and, like, reintroducing these concepts of, like, wealth redistribution or even, like, minor kind of welfare things, or pointing out who the bad actors are. And it's so amazing and wonderful to, like, hear that for the first time on TV. Like, it's so empowering to be like, yes. I mean, literally, even just through the mechanism of television, be like, here's a mainstream politician putting forth this, like, basic critique that that I've thought my whole life, and it's just like, I've never heard them say it. The one that I still have not heard, and I wonder if we're gonna ever get to hear it, but I would love to hear it, is like somebody just going, like a mainstream politician, presidential candidate or member of the House or Senate or something, or even just like a mainstream pundit going on TV and just being like, we ought to tax the shit out of these goddamn churches.
Yes.
Yes. Tax every single one of them. Yes. Remove this ridiculous fucking exemption. And that doesn't just go for like the obviously like evil ones. Just all of them. What is this nonsense that you can't tax a church? They rake in the money. They give it up. Does the church use the infrastructure? Does the private jets that we're talking about, do they use like a fucking public airport? Yeah, they do. All right, then pay your fucking taxes. Pay them. Pay up. Tithe me, motherfucker.
if we think about it on like a structural basis like that, right? There has never been a point in American history where fewer people are religious or identify as religious, right?
Sure.
You know, this is the most religiously, like structurally religiously, I don't mean spiritually, but I mean structurally religiously disengaged point in American history where not the majority of people in the United States are not going to religious institutions on a regular basis. And yet these religious institutions are using public goods, right? Like fire, EMT, sewage, plumbing, water services. They tend to take up a lot of space in most town squares, right, across America. So if they are not being used, why are we paying for it through our tax dollars?
Here's a little idea that you just gave me, Dwight. How about this? We'll keep the deal. You don't pay taxes, but also you don't get any of the services. And the next time your fucking church catches on fire, see if God puts it out.
You know, I had a really funny thought the other day of imagining Donald Trump. Like, imagine Donald Trump praying. Like, it's an absurd notion. Like, certainly he's never done it. But just imagine Donald Trump, like, doing deals with God.
Please, God, please have Anna Wintour invite me to the 2019 Vanity Fair party. She didn't invite me in 1983. It was ridiculous. It was lame. She's a loser. Dear God, please bring back Randy Quaid from Vancouver, Canada.
I love the vacation films. I'd love to see another one. I mean, I think the whole kind of psychological circle we were trying to square before about this idea of like, hypocrisy versus grift. Like, I think the purest emblem and moment in our times and the way the news cycle goes these days, this has already been forgotten. But do you guys remember Trump signing Bibles?
Yes.
Yeah, hell yeah, man.
At post disaster, like that more than anything, I think it shows the ability of both of these things to work totally finely in tandem with each other.
Absolutely, they do.
I'm not saying it's never a worthy cause to point out these hypocrisies of like, there's the very obvious one of like, look at all of these so-called Christian preachers and they're not truly living, a Christian life of poverty or, all of the actual teachings that are in the New Testament or whatever. But like the fact that those exist, it's just such a testament to the union, the political union of this organizational grouping of evangelicals and the party of capitalism and fascism.
Yes.
They are just bound up together. I don't see them separating anytime soon, and I cannot find one of these goddamn Bibles on eBay. If one of our listeners can, please buy it and send it to me.
Well, what I would really like is, surely we have the technology now to like ameliorate gravestones, and what I would really like is to have like a GIF on a gravestone that kind of like expresses some sort of value that you had as a person, that just perpetually plays on a kind of rudimentary video thing on your gravestone. And I would like to have, I think it would be very valuable to have on gravestones a GIF of Trump throwing paper towels to people in Puerto Rico, like properly desperate people in Puerto Rico, and just kind of like giving it the limp-wristed throw of the paper towels. I think I would like to have that on my GIF, as a GIF on my gravestone for perpetuity.
You just introduced a whole awful vision in my head of like just a vast boomer graveyard of like dancing minions.
Do you remember, by the way, from that same time when he was throwing the paper towels into the crowd, right? And then they had on the stage, on the table, they had those like cans of water, I believe, as well, like canned food or something, right? And he picked up one of them and like pretended like he was gonna throw it. You know what I'm saying? Like that would be a big funny joke to fucking, like, what if I threw this big heavy can of water at you fucking peasants as well?
Usually at the end of these kinds of things, we do the like punishment, like what kind of punishment would we give them? I think we've kind of said it already. My punishment for all these guys would be to tax 100% of their money, take all of it, and use it to create that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like that episode of Black Mirror where like when people die, you can create like a permanent version of them and put them in basically this like simulated heaven. To do that, but to make make a simulated hell and use all of that money to just build this little hell that we could put somewhere, I don't know, in like Central Florida. And just, you could go and look at them and go, haha, look at Jim Baker.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, just, comforting as well is the knowledge that, if there is a hell, I'm confident that every single one of these people are going to be in it.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I also want to point out, and I'm not speaking for my other podcast mates here, but if there is like a heaven and hell, I'm obviously going to heaven. I don't know about Chris and Dwight. I'm not going to speak for them. I'm not going to vouch for them at all. You're on your own, guys, at the pearly gates.
If there is a heaven, I'm going to it because I have correct views on ketchup.
That it should only be used on French fries and nothing else?
No. No,
wrong. No,
you guys.
Ketchup goes on everything. Ketchup goes on everything.
Clearly, you guys. Oh, you're going to fucking hell. Yeah, put your ketchup on your disgusting fucking burnt, well done burger, Shane.
Ketchup goes on everything.
Absurd. If you're a child.
Anybody that uses.
If you're a child.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Anybody that uses ketchup that's not Heinz, they're going in the gulags.
No, you're both entirely wrong. All ketchup tastes exactly the same, and it goes on everything.
That's true.
It goes on everything.
That's the correct.
You know what? You're going to hell.
Absolutely
You're going to hell. You're all going to hell. All right?
No. There's only Heinz and nothing else. And it's actually an opportunity as leftists, to have a leftist critique to say that we are going to reappropriate all ketchup from John Kerry, who famously...
yeah, the Heinz family, the Heinz-Kerry family fortune.
The Heinz family fortune. That's going to us, buddy. We're nationalizing the shit out of that, and ketchup is going to be great.
Don't bring politics into this.
I didn't want to.
Don't try to politicize the ketchup.
It was up to John Kerry, and it's not the first senator that Teresa Heinz Kerry had married.
Who was the other one?
Wait, did she marry a Heinz from Pennsylvania?
Did she marry into the Heinz? No, I believe she's the
Okay,
daughter.
we will do the ketchup genealogy on a different episode, okay? That's another one.
Listen, if you're standing at the gates of hell and you're sitting there with a packet of Heinz ketchup in one hand and a packet of Red Gold ketchup or some bullshit in your other hand, all you need to remember before you're looking at your fiery eternity is stay cool, folks.
Hallelujah. Praise God.
Mama told me not to, I did anyway, misbehaving.
Daddy said don't, but I said I'm gonna misbehaving.
Eyes on the windowsill, swimming in the creek.
Catching crawdads and playing with a stick. And I got caught shaving. Just two little country kids outside misbehaving.
Teacher said don't, but I said it anyway, misbehaving.
Preacher said no, if you do, you're gonna pay misbehaving.
Kicking and spitting and cussing out loud.
Running through the house with a pickle in my mouth.
Playing in the street, look at me outside waving.
Just two